Slightly, I suggested becoming the quote-unquote late nation, how Bismarck unified Germany in 1871. The term late nation is reserved for Germany because of all of the Western great countries. Germany was the last to become a nation, much later than the United States, England, France, even Italy. So that term, late nation, is a term that historians use. What you see here is the beginning, the ceremony to begin Deutschland, Germany, on January 18th, 1871. After Germany defeated France. You see here Kaiser Wilhelm. You may know him as Emperor William. I think in William they call him here, but I have refrained from translating German names into English, so Wilhelm is the proper name. And here is Bismarck. And that is in Versailles, a topic that repeats itself, let's say, how many years later, 50 years later, when France and the Allies had defeated Germany after World War I, the Treaty of Versailles, as some of you may remember from my talks on the Weimar Republic. Okay, let's get started. Here is the outline. I have 4 different parts. I will put all of the 19th century in perspective. I think we need that to understand what was going on in Germany. Part 2 quickly treats the first 50 years of Europe and Germany until 1848, the failed German and many other failed European revolutions. Part 3 is the main part, the road to German unification. And then my final talk will be on Bismarck, the person and the politician. I have a 5th part, but that is just one question that historians have asked, can we draw a straight line from Bismarck to Hitler? Ovid seems to be fascinated with Bismarck. That's why I am spending quite a bit of time on him as a person. And I'll let you in on a secret. Had I lived and been around with Bismarck, he would not have been my friend. But I hope I can get that across a little bit later. So, the 19th century, what you need to understand to put it in perspective. Here is a chart that plots GDP, that is income per capita, for almost 2,000 years, and it hasn't changed a bit. And then something happens at the end of the 18th century, right around here. Income per capita goes up, and most of you will know what that refers to. We today call that the Industrial Revolution. This chart is from an earlier topic I presented on Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations. He wrote it in 1776, and he throughout 200 years of economic doctrine called mercantilism. Today there is a resurgence of mercantilism. It's called now, what do we call it? Industrial nationalism or something. Anyway, it's associated with not only with Donald Trump, but there is a resurgence of mercantilism. Basically, it goes quickly exports are good, imports are bad. That's in a nutshell what people from 1600 to roughly 1800 lived by. And Adam Smith threw all of that out and said, no, we should trade freely among nations. So I'm not suggesting that Adam Smith is responsible for this, but there is a coincidence that he wrote this exactly here a quarter of a century before the end of the 18th century, and income per capita takes off. So the 19th century was a century of economic upheaval that industrialization brought with it. Not many history books on Bismarck or so will give you that background, but you need to keep that in mind. And then something else that is very important to understand German unification, and that is there was at that time, and there still is today, a religious divide in Germany, and it basically goes the north and the east of Germany is mostly or predominantly Protestant, and the south and the areas west of the Rhine River are predominantly Catholic. That is something that we still see today, and you need to keep that in mind when we discuss Prussia, Bavaria, and Bismarck. The historians call this century the long 19th century, and they say this is the age of revolution, from the French Revolution to the many European revolutions in 1848, all failed. Then this period, the age of capital, and then the age of colonization, or the age of empire. So let me quickly, in 5 minutes, tell you a little bit about the first 50 years of the 19th century. And central at the beginning of the 19th century is the House of Bourbon. And you may have heard of Napoleon, but there are two of which are important ones. This is Napoleon Bonaparte the First. And this is the Napoleon the Third. Ovid can tell you much more about him. Here it appears that he is, what is this? Tell me quickly. He is the nephew?
The Prince of Rome, that was Napoleon's son, the Prince of Austria.
But wasn't there some doubt about paternity and...
Well, that was about Napoleon III.
Yeah.
Paternity.
Yeah, okay. So anyway, he lived while Bismarck was in charge in Germany, and he lost the German-French War in 1870, 1871. And we'll talk more about that in a short while. So, beginning of the 19th century, it sees the largest extent of the French Empire. You see Empire of France, states under Napoleon control, and most of Germany here, Confederation of the Rhine, is part of his sphere of influence. States allied with Napoleon, and here at the periphery there are some states still opposed to French rule. That changes rather quickly, and here this is the same chart basically, 1810, and then 5-6 years later France is reduced from all of this back to its home country here. You see the 5 great powers in Europe and what their population was. in 1815 was the time of the Congress of Vienna. Russia was the most populous nation with 50 million, France with 30 million, Austria had 30 million, Prussia, the Kingdom of Prussia, which is not a contiguous state, more on that a little bit later, had just 11 million, and England roughly 20 million. And you can figure that their military had similar power, similar strengths to the population. I couldn't find a chart that compared strengths of the military of these countries. But these were the 5 great powers of Europe. There is at that time not Germany, but there is the German question at the center of Europe has been and continues to be a central issue for Europe. The largest German state or nation was the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, and more on that shortly. In 1848, all of Europe saw, beginning in France, but all of Europe saw revolutions that more or less all failed, including the German Revolution that utterly failed. This is the timeline of German unification. I've extended it a little bit. Here is the American Revolution and Adam Smith, the French Revolution. Napoleon defeats Prussia and Austria and ends the Holy Roman Empire of German nation. That warrants a topic by itself. And Napoleon is defeated, and we have the Vienna Congress where Prince Metternich more or less invited all the great powers and reorganized the European continent. And we have several decades of peace in Europe. At the end of the revolution in Germany, the Prussian king was offered the title of German emperor, and he rejected it, and nothing changed in Germany. 1862, Bismarck becomes the head of the Prussian government, and then he presides over 3 wars. The War of Schleswig against Denmark, the brother war between 2 German nations, Prussia and Austria, and several other German states, and then finally Prussia, the French War in 1870, and leading to German unification in 1871. At the beginning, at the beginning of the 19th century, there were roughly 300 independent German states. Some put it at 296 exactly, but I'm not sure that you could really count them. Look at this conglomerate here. The largest states are Austria, Bavaria, and Prussia, and more on Prussia soon. Napoleon reformed these states and cut them down from 296 to 39, but still way too many. Why did the 1848 revolution fail in Germany? The 500 or so delegates, they wanted a unified country, a unified nation with a constitution that guaranteed their civil liberties. The delegates could not agree on whether the government should be a constitutional monarchy like the English model or a republic like the American model. They were divided on this. But the real big issue was, should a unified Germany be with or without Austria? The solution with Austria is called by historians the Greater German solution, and the solution that eventually prevailed, the solution without Austria, is called the smaller or the lesser German solution. So they couldn't decide and agree on that at that time, and overall there was no broad-based popular support, and the delegates had ideas but no money and no military, which still remained with Prussia. So, German dualism, Austria versus Prussia, northern versus the southern. I will, let's see how that works here. I will show you the evolution of Prussia, but I won't go through all of this. So I'll show you how Prussia evolved, and I'll let you just watch this. It goes fairly quickly. This is Prussia, never was a contiguous state. In the 18th century, it acquires more and more, changes all the time. There is Frederick II. If you ask where is Prussia today, well, there is no Prussia today anymore, but you can see it becomes bigger and bigger. Let me stop. Oops, what happened? Why does this not work? Okay, now we come to Napoleon defeating Prussia in 1804-05. You see how it shrinks, and then it starts growing, and we quickly come to Bismarck, who becomes right there. He becomes. That is probably the greatest extent of Prussia. So it's all of most of northern Germany, but never is a contiguous territory. One of the very famous parts that are in Prussia, but not part of Prussia, is the Kingdom of Hanover, and more on that later. You saw these, the Prussian rulers, Frederick William, and then the German Empire. You have William I, William II, who lost World War II. He appointed Bismarck as the chancellor in 1862. And William's son, William II, dismissed Bismarck 28 years later. What do we mean by German dualism? And this is something I learned. Let me backtrack a little bit. I was born in 1954, 9 years after World War II. And for me, Austria always was a non-German nation. It was always clear that Germany and Austria were two different nations. It never occurred to me that they could have at some point in time become one nation. But here is, Austria was the bigger nation at the time in the middle of the 19th century, and here is Prussia circling around the Prussian lion circling around the Austrian elephant. Prussia was the upstart. Austria was the established and more powerful German nation. Something that I didn't learn in my school years, but anyway. This is the boundary of the German Confederation, and herein lies the problem. It's basically German-speaking territories, but Austria is as such a dual monarchy. It is Austrian and Hungarian, and there are Italian parts, Croatian parts. What do you do if you unite Austria with the rest of the German nations? What do you do with Hungary? What do you do with the non-German speaking parts of the Austrian Empire? That is the problem. And here are the solutions that were discussed. A greater Austrian-led Germany with all of Austria, Croatia, parts of Croatia, and Hungary. A greater German solution, which brings in only the German-speaking parts of Austria, but not the non-German speaking parts. And this is the solution that finally that prevailed. It's the lesser German solution, which excludes all of Austria and Hungary from Germany. And we're going just to today. If you go back and you see Austria was 30 million, Prussia 11 million. This is what it is today. Germany is 83 million and Austria is 1/10 of it. One other thing that I will put in here, and I'll pause for just a second because I find it so interesting. If you ask people in Europe, where would you move if you could choose? Look at these countries, they would become Swiss, and all of Eastern Europe wants to become Germany. I find that fascinating. Nobody wants to become Austrian or so. Even the Austrians want to become more like the Swiss. Anyway, that is today's situation. Interestingly, you have Ireland and you have Turkey who want to become American. Virtually all of Eastern Europeans aspire to emigrate to Germany. Timeline of Bismarck. Right after the failed revolution, he gives up farming and enters politics. He becomes a delegate to the Prussian delegate at the German Confederation in Frankfurt. Then is sent to as ambassador to Russia, St. Petersburg, and then to France. He is fluent in French, English, what else? Some Polish, Russian. So he is multilingual. He is the perfect diplomat to negotiate European power diplomatic affairs. In 1862, he finally achieves his dream. He has real power as the Prussian prime minister. Here are the wars of unification. There is 4 years before unification, he becomes Chancellor of the North German Federation, and then finally Chancellor of the German Empire. Forced resignation, he dies at age 83. Here are the 3 wars. Prussia and Austria still together versus Denmark. Result, Denmark loses Schleswig to Prussia and Holstein to Austria, which is not a good solution, and it leads basically to the next war in 1866, which is at the same time or shortly after the American Civil War, and this is the German Civil War, the German brother war for supremacy in the German lands. Against all odds, Prussia defeats Austria, which is henceforth kicked out of the future German Reich, and the lesser German solution prevails. So there's one more war for Bismarck to fight, and that is against France. And more on that, he defeats France in 1871, and that leads to the German emperor being crowned in Versailles. You saw the first slide. So how does Bismarck achieve it? Okay, we discussed the Austrian situation, but we still have the non-Prussian, so-called the southern and middle states, Bavaria, Baden-Württemberg, state of Hessen-Nassau, and so on. So what Bismarck does, he creates the Northern German Confederation north of the Main River. The Main River is roughly here. It's the precursor to German unification, and secretly, Bismarck negotiates mutual defense agreements with the southern states. This is not publicly known, but Bismarck must have already had a war with France in mind, because what these agreements stipulated were that if Prussia or the Northern German Confederation is attacked by an outside force, these states will come to its defense. So now he needs to trigger that event, and there is the cunning Bismarck achieves that. Shall I get into that? It's a little complicated. What happened in the late 1860s is that the regent here in Baden-Württemberg was offered the throne in Spain after Isabella died or abdicated, and France did not want that to happen. So France tried to prevent that under all circumstances, and they wrote a sharply worded letter to the German government. Bismarck summarized it, made it even look sharper than it really was meant, and leaked it to the press. And there was an uproar, and France decided to declare war on the North German Federation, hoping that the smaller states would come to either stay neutral or, stay neutral. But with these mutual defense agreements, they aided Prussia, and the result was a defeat of France in 1871. So, as a result, most of these southern states decided to join the North German Confederation, with the exception of the proud Bavarians. You still have that today. Bavarians are like Texans. They are Bavarians first and Germans second. And they had a king that you all have heard of, King Ludwig, who has who built the fancy King Ludwig castles, and he loved his castles, but he built them out of his private assets, but his private assets were not enough. So he was short of cash to finalize his fancy castles. Some of you may have been here. This is my favorite castle, Linderhof, and here is Neuschwanstein. That is a painting of King Ludwig. In reality, he looked a little bit different. I'll show you what he looked like. But what cunning Bismarck did is he offered King Ludwig 6 million gold marks. I have no idea how much that is in today's currency. Maybe, probably several hundred million euros or dollars. It was a secret deal at the time, so he offered him 6 million gold marks, not for the state of Bavaria, but for the king privately, so he could finish his castles. Also, Bismarck's boss, Wilhelm I, was not supposed to know about this. So how could he come up with 6 million gold marks, Bismarck, that is? Well, what happened is the Kingdom of Hanover fought with the Austrians in 1866 against Prussia. They lost, and as a result, they lost their kingdom, and with it a slush fund called the Welfenfonds. I don't want to get into the details, but that is a fund that Bismarck kept secret and used it as his slush fund. And out of that, he paid King Ludwig 6 million gold marks. And that, King Ludwig was not interested in politics. He was interested in his castles and what have you. So that, with the 6 million in gold marks, came a letter that Bismarck had drafted for King Ludwig to send to King Wilhelm, offering him the title of Emperor of all of Germany. That was the final step for all of Germany, other than Austria, to become unified. Bavaria was the final holdout, and that's how it happened. It came out later, and but that's the real story. So here is what he really looked like. Bismarck, King Ludwig, 6 million gold marks changed hands into his private coffers at the time, unknown to the public. Okay, so that is the story of German unification. I will satisfy Ovid's curiosity about Bismarck, and I'll tell you about Bismarck the person and the politician. The early years, these are his life stations before he became a politician. This is where he was born. Childhood was here. Boarding schools in Berlin, university in Göttingen, his first job as a city administrator in Aachen, less than a year stint in the military here, and after that he became a farmer until 1845 or so. So that was his life. In all of it is in northern Germany. Would you have recognized him? Well, here you might have recognized him. And that's the official wedding photo at age 32. Here are pictures that you might have seen before. This is maybe the most famous one. And this is as a private citizen just 3 years before he died. For me, it helps to see who were some of his contemporaries, who he overlapped with. This is his lifespan. There is Disraeli, Abraham Lincoln, Napoleon III, Clemens Fürst von Metternich. Who knows where Metternich was born? Not in Austria. He was born in Bonn, Germany, same place where Ludwig von Beethoven was born, at a very similar time. This is Wilhelm, King of Prussia, and here is a musician, the most famous musician of that time, Richard Wagner, pretty much overlaps with most of Bismarck. These are these same politicians and musicians. So before we go to Bismarck the person, his achievements, yes, he achieved German unification, but without Austria. And it is the irony of history that Hitler, who is Austrian, who was born Austrian, and under some dubious circumstances acquired German citizenship, but he brought Austria finally back into the German fold in 1938, what Bismarck did not do at the time. So Hitler brought Austria back for how many years? 7 years or so. Irony of history. Bismarck, during his reign, after the unification wars, there was peace, and he achieved a power balance in Europe, and he was a non-expansionist, just the opposite of what Hitler was. And there was peace in Europe during his reign. And he is the creator of the modern welfare state. More on that soon. The constitution that he created was not a modern parliamentary system, not a republic. The constitution was tailor-made for him and his boss, King Wilhelm. He did nothing to overcome the Protestant-Catholic divide. He probably even made it worse. More on Bismarck as the founder of the welfare state. You may have heard this. He was the first in Germany. The first health insurance was created, first accident insurance, the first pension law. Here it says, I'll translate this for you, the German social contract, unparalleled role model for the world. But it was not because Bismarck liked the welfare state, but he wrote in his autobiography, in his collected works, this is what he wrote. I have translated for you. My thoughts were to win over, or shall I say to bribe, the working classes to regard the state as a social institution which exists for them and for their welfare. He wanted to prevent the proletarians, the workers, from forming their own party or joining the Social Democratic Party, and that's why he created these the social contract. Okay, you may have wondered why I haven't actually told him that it's Otto von Bismarck. So what is the significance of the fun in Otto von Bismarck? Well, his good friend and fellow student in Göttingen, Bostonian John Lothrop Motley, wrote, "One can very properly divide the Germans into two classes, the fons and the non-fons. Those lucky enough to have the three magic letters in front of their names belong to the nobility, and as a consequence are highly aristocratic. Without these, the others can arrange the letters of the alphabet in every possible combination. They remain plebs." That is, he was of lower nobility. Yes, he was that. I already told you this. French, he speaks with the purity and fluency almost of a native, and the same may be said of English. Not so fluent is the Chancellor's Italian as his French, but yet can read the journals of Rome. Once, too, he boasted that he was about the only man in the Foreign Office who understands Russian language, a language which he acquired during his residence in St. Petersburg. And not only did he master Russian, but he also learned Polish to a degree enabling him to make himself understood. Can you imagine any statesman today with that mastery of foreign languages? Anyway, here is what historians have remarked on Bismarck. Ruthless, cunning, a quote-unquote complex character, that is a euphemism, a hypochondriac with the constitution of an ox, a brutal tyrant, a convert to an extreme form of evangelical Protestantism. Some facts. He is still revered in Germany today. There are more than 700 Bismarck monuments in Germany, many more abroad. Many German cities, almost all German cities, have a street named after Bismarck. Well, there is Bismarck, the capital of North Dakota. There are the Bismarck battleships in World War II. The most popular German herring is the Bismarck herring. Bismarck's own collected works comprise 19 volumes with an average of 500 pages. He was a prolific writer. There are more than 7,000 books with Bismarck as the topic. We can count at least 50 scientific Bismarck biographies and many more popular ones. One of the best biographer of Bismarck is Jonathan Steinberg, more on him shortly. And he made some astute comments. He held office for 28 years and transformed his world more completely than anybody in Europe during the 19th century, with the exception of Napoleon III, who was emperor and a general. Bismarck did it while being neither the one or the other. All who knew him, without exception, testify to a kind of magnetic pull or attraction which even those who hated him would not deny. Bismarck always loved to give his staff proof of his power. Their achievements were always his. If something went wrong, the subordinate got the blame, even if he had acted under orders. It was a psychological necessity for Bismarck to make his power felt by tormenting, harrying, and ill-treating people. Bismarck's hypochondria was as gargantuan as his appetite. The more you read about him, you realize that he was full of contradictions. Yes, he was the creator of a constitution, and yet he described it as a toy. He was a Junker, that is the landed nobility in northern and eastern Germany, who did not shrink from acting against his own class interest. He declared war on socialists and yet tried to solve the social question by creating the modern welfare state. He wanted stability in Europe and made fun of the very idea of Europe. You may have heard or read these quotes, but you may not know that they're from Bismarck. Politics is not an exact science, but an art. It's one of my favorite quotes. Politics is the art of the possible. Probably all of you have heard that. That's Otto von Bismarck. Preventive war is like committing suicide for fear of death. And this is his most famous quote. Not by speeches and votes of the majority are the great questions of this time decided, but by iron and blood. That's why he's called the Iron Chancellor. I'll give you 3 biographies if you want to read more on him. Of the many, many there are. Let me start with this one. Otto Pflanzer is an American historian who wrote the first very substantial 3-volume biography of Bismarck in 1963. So it's in English. The best German one that I know of is by a famous German historian, Lothar Gall, Bismarck the White Revolutionary, and the most recent one, Jonathan Steinberg, 2011. Very approachable, very readable. I can highly recommend it to you, and I have him speak to you shortly. Here he is. Jonathan Steinberg is an American who died 2 years ago, a historian in England, I think it was Cambridge, and in Ivy League colleges. And let me see that I can get him to speak. Oh, does this? Oops. Doesn't work. Let me. You're not supposed to see this. Sorry. There we go. Let me do something radical. Give it, no? No? I don't know how to get it back. Well, I'm sorry about that. Here we go. We're back. But I can't, if you go to YouTube and search for Jonathan Steinberg, you will get a 5-minute video from him where he talks about him writing his biography, why he wrote it, and why Bismarck was such a fascinating person for him. Okay, so I'm sorry about that. It does not work. None less than Henry Kissinger reflected on Bismarck, and he starts his essay with this sentence: few statesmen have altered the history of their society so profoundly as Otto von Bismarck. So that leads me to the question that I posed originally. The end of my talk. Some historians in the past 30, 40 years have speculated, was Hitler an accident in German history, or can one draw a logical line from Bismarck to Hitler? I think that debate is now mostly over, and most historians come down and say no. Hitler was very different than Bismarck. Hitler was an expansionist, and Bismarck was by and large a non-expansionist. He wanted a balance of power in Europe, whereas Hitler was the opposite. But I wanted to alert you to this. There are ups and downs in the historiography of Bismarck in Germany, but overall Bismarck is still held in high esteem in Germany. Okay, we have no more minutes, but we have a few more minutes for your questions.
Thank you so much. Very, very informative presentation, and I'm sure it will be